Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine. Welcome to my channel. Today I want to share with you the importance of play for children and the way that you can hopefully help them transition out of play so that you can get them to homeschool. So the first thing I want to share with you is the importance of play. So for kids under about 6, 7, 8, or 9, play is really important for them, and I encourage you to let them play rather than pulling them out of that in order to do schoolwork. But in order to really have this be good for them and good for their development and good for their education, we gotta first define what play actually is. Now, for me, and for this video, and for my advice to you, I have very specific recommendations for play. First of all, it's completely media free, so no audiobooks, no iPads, no movies, no video games, not even educational games. That's the first thing. So you gotta eliminate that completely, because I know that kids tend to like those kinds of things, and that's not the kind of play that I think is wholesome and good for their development for this purpose that I'm going to share with you today. You know, if you decide to have that in other parts of your life, that's great, but we're going to be focusing on early childhood development and specifically play for older children, and by older I mean anywhere from like say 7 to 10. And how that's still important for their academic education, but I understand you still need to get to that, so you're gonna have to pull them out of this play in order to get them to do schoolwork. So this is, I just wanna first tell you exactly what the parameters are so that we are on the same page. All right, so no media to begin with. The next thing is that I recommend that this play be creative, open-ended, and imaginative. So as wonderful as board games are, as educational as they are, I'm also not necessarily meaning that they should be playing board games all the time. This is really great. It's great for their education, and it will be used later on in this video as a transition tool, but when they are playing, I really want you to help nurture and foster open-ended creative play. So in order to do this, you probably are wondering what kind of toys you should have available so that your kids can actually engage in this kind of play, so they know what to do with themselves, because if your kids haven't been doing this kind of play, they might not know how to do this or how to get started. And I have a couple of tips on helping you prepare your home or play space with some toys that can help them with their pretend, imaginative, creative, open-ended play. So the first things that you probably want to have on hand are things that are not specific, so they could really be anything. Those kinds of things are like fabric, blocks, even cardboard boxes, because they can be anything and you can transform them to suit your playing needs. So the silks that I go for, or rather the fabrics that I go for, tend to be silk first, and then large bits of not canvas quite, but a sturdy fabric or cotton. These fabrics are ones that we have an abundance of in our home, and the kids use them a lot. Now, I have repurposed old sheets and curtains for this purpose, and they come in wonderfully handy because they're really large, whereas the silks that I have are a bit smaller, and those are really good for dress-up play and for accents and other things, but really large fabric is great. So you don't have to go out and buy this fabric. You probably already have it in your linen closet, or maybe even like in your living room, like little throw blankets or those kinds of things. They're great for creative, open-ended, imaginative play. Now, one of the biggest frustrations my kids had in playing with fabric was getting it to stay where they wanted it to stay. So suppose they wanted to build a fort and they collected a couple of chairs or stools and then they draped the fabric over it. What ended up happening is the fabric would droop and it would fall, and that was really frustrating for my children. So initially they would stack books on top of the fabric, which is a great solution but not the best solution, because sometimes things would get pulled and books falling on you, it hurts. It's not the greatest thing to have happen. So recently I inherited a lot of binder clips, and you would think, what are you going to do with these? But actually they turn out perfect for keeping fabric together and even keeping it onto chairs and other things in order to build forts and teepees and other things that your children can play in. Now, I especially like the metal binder clips because they're really strong and really sturdy, and you can find them anywhere and they're super cheap. But if you want a more natural approach to this, then I've got two suggestions for you. One are these binder clips. Well, they're wooden binder clips, and they are made just out of wood and rubber bands, and they're fantastic. They're beautiful, but they do not bind the fabric as well as a binder clip, because those binder clips, I mean, they're really strong. And so those are great for loose things and things that aren't going to get tugged a lot. You can also use rubber bands, which is a great solution. Also, it's super cheap, and you probably have them in your house. You don't have to go out and buy them. And so this is another way to help fasten fabrics together, and then you can also use that to fasten it to the legs of chairs or other things, because my kids are huge fort builders, and I bet your kids are too. The last thing that you can use is just some rope or string in order to tie the fabric in place. It doesn't work quite as well, and then your children still have to do the knots, which could be challenging if they're young, but that's also another solution for you. All right, cardboard boxes. I am sure that you have received something in the mail and your child has enjoyed the cardboard box more than the contents of that box. So whenever you get cardboard boxes, I encourage you to keep them on hand so that your kids can use them either to use as forts or to cut them up and use them for other purposes. It's a great upcycling project for you and your kids, and of course it is super open-ended, really affordable or free, and can encourage hours and hours of play. All right, something else that you might consider having on hand are blocks or dowels or any wood piece that can be used for multiple things. And we have a number of dowels in our home, and they have been everything from swords to teepees. And those are really easy to find, and they can provide so much for your children's imaginative play. Now don't worry if you don't have dowels, you can still use just sticks that you find on trails or in your backyard. Those work really well as well. One word of caution is that you want to be mindful if you've got really young children using them as, things that you're going to hit each other with, like swords or just sticks that they want to fight with. I know my children really enjoy that, but you still need to be mindful of supervising your children if they're going to play with something that's a little bit, can cause some bodily harm. So be mindful of that for sure. So blocks are also really great. Now my children don't use blocks as much for interactive, imaginative play as much as they use them for creating scenes in which then they will play with like little characters or finger puppets. So having dolls or finger puppets or anything that your child can use as characters that are more general and less descriptive are going to encourage a lot of open-ended play. I've noticed that the finger puppets that I've made that are very general end up getting played with more than the few finger puppets that I've made that are really specific, like they are actual characters from books or movies. Then they are limited in how they can play with that particular finger puppet. So I would encourage you to get dolls that are, or other little figures that are a little bit more nondescript. That way your children can have them represent any character that they think of. Some other things that help with the whole creating an imaginary scene, a pretend play scene, are wooden animals and other wooden figurines, maybe trees or anything that can be used like to represent water or mountains. We have a variety of things, and sometimes they're not even what you would expect them to be, but the children bring their own imagination to that, and they come up with wonderful, wonderful play scenes. Felt is another great fabric to have on hand. Usually have small rectangular pieces of felt that can be manipulated to represent almost anything, or of course they can be cut apart and and shaped to represent water or trees or land or other formations. My kids have really enjoyed using that as well. Of course, I tend to go for the all-natural version of these things, but if you don't, then of course you can get these from local craft stores for a fraction of the cost, and that would do just as well. All right, so your kids are playing. They're playing wonderfully. They're playing cooperatively. They're coming up with these great storylines, and you want them to do school now. This happens a lot in our home, and generally I don't like to interrupt play because it is so valuable for them. Now, right now, currently, my children are 6, 10, 15, and 18. So clearly, my 18-year-old is not playing this kind of pretend play, and my 15-year-old has just exited this whole realm of pretend play. And so when he participates, it's more in a youthful capacity and more not quite patronizing, but you know, he's kind of playing along, but he's not coming up with these fantastical play scenes and imagination because, you know, he's 15. So primarily I'm speaking now for my 10-year-old and my 6-year-old who still really enjoy this kind of play. Now, if they are both playing together and I want them to do school, then usually I will let a certain amount of time go by before I try to encourage school. And there are a lot of tips that I have to share for you regarding this transition. But generally, I will not interrupt that play unless I really feel a need for it, and if I do, then I will use a transition technique, but in general, I will let them play until it's out of their system, because if I interrupt that, then I'm not getting their full attention when I'm trying to do school anyway, so I'm only getting a partial attention and partial focus and partial concentration, and then I'm like, you know, that's just going to be a waste of both of our time, so you might as well go and play. Now, this also happens after a visit to the library. I've noticed that it's really hard to pull my child, my 10-year-old specifically, out of a good book, and so usually we have to really be selective of the times that we're going to go to the library because he will end up spending every waking moment reading books. So when they're playing and it's been hours and you feel the need now to transition them into school, and mind you, this would be for children above 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. If they're younger than that age range, then I would just encourage wholesome, open-ended creative play for most of the day, along with other worthy things to be imitated. For instance, you know, your child can help you cook in the kitchen when you're cooking, or help you do chores, help you do grocery shopping, or you can read or tell stories, but for the most part, that play is really important for the young child. Suppose your child's a little bit older, and by older I mean anywhere between 7, 8, 9 and older, up to puberty about, and you want them to do school. I've got about 3 or 4 techniques that can really help you transition them from play to school. The first thing is to take advantage of the low points in their creative play. Now, this is not the best parenting technique, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. If a problem or conflict arises in their play, I generally use that opportunity to transition to a new activity. Generally, the conflicts that occur are things that are not, they can't be addressed from a parental perspective at that time, or at another time rather. Like, you can discuss those things later on. It doesn't have to be resolved right in that moment. For instance, sometimes there's a power struggle between my children, and then the play kind of gets interrupted, and then we transition to something else. But at a later time, when my children are not emotional about that particular situation, then we can talk through some techniques to resolve that issue. So it doesn't always have to be right in that moment, because sometimes the emotions are a little bit high, and it's probably better to discuss it later on. So at that moment, the cool off period actually becomes school. Another transition technique that could be used even if your children are like deep into their play is simply to sit down in their play space with a book, or simply begin telling a story. I have found that to be the greatest transition. It is painless, it is inspiring, it is gentle, it's something that is so soft, that your children don't even realize that they have been lulled and encouraged out of their play. So you sit down with a good book or a good story, and if you're not used to storytelling yet, I encourage you to give it a try. Children really, really love hearing your original stories, even if they are inspired by things that you've read or seen before. So sitting down with a good book or story helps bridge that play with something that's quote-unquote more academic. Now, if you would rather do a different activity to transition, you can also try educational board games or any kind of game, obviously not an electronic one here, but you can definitely try a board game to help transition from play to school. Something else I like to do is a hands-on project. I really love getting all of the things set up for a project and simply beginning that project, and that's usually enough to spark curiosity in my children to find out, well, what's going on over there, or I'd like to try that. And again, it's making what you're doing almost more exciting than the play, and they're naturally drawn to it. I like to keep that as part of our homeschool so the kids are always excited about what's coming next rather than, oh, I gotta do this next. So I feel like I get the most out of my kids when I am doing something that they want to be doing, or I am encouraging them to continue with what they're doing and really immerse themselves in it and get it out of their system before they transition to something else. So that's why I do let my kids play a lot. But we still get our work done. It just may not look like traditional work, but it still gets done at the end of the day. And, well, maybe not the end of a day, but it gets done in the end, whatever the end may be. For me, personally, I have 2 milestone markers. One is the end of elementary school and kind of the beginning of middle school. So that I kind of break up our school into all of elementary school, and then I have a really small portion for middle school, and then by the time they're ready for high school or community college, that's something that then I pass the baton and they are graduated from homeschool. So there's this end marker. By the end of, say, 6th grade, the goals for my children are that they have to know 3 things. They need to know how to read proficiently, write proficiently, and do math proficiently, and just the basic math. I'm not asking for a lot of the details. They just need to know how to do the 4 operations and do them well with whole numbers and fractions and decimals and percents. So I keep it really simple, but I want them to know how to do it really well. I feel like that is the foundation for the education, and then after that they can do pretty much anything because they are prepared to take on that additional learning because they have the basics. But I still do a lot of history and science, but in that history and science are still the foundation, the building blocks that they're going to need, because both those subjects are rich with reading and writing, and if you're a little creative, they can be rich with math as well. All right, so let's see. Did I get 3 transition techniques? Do we need a 4th? One thing that I've noticed with my children is that, and myself actually, is that we tend to like to really get into something, and we may do it for a really long time, and that includes math, and that includes math worksheets. Oh my goodness. So my 10-year-old son, for instance, he may not do his daily math for a week, but when he finally does it, he may sit and do it for 45 minutes, an hour and a half, and he'll get that all caught up. So if I can be aware that, hey, we have this goal, but I'm not going to require that you achieve it every day, then he will achieve it on his own time schedule, and he will achieve it willingly and with his own drive rather than me pressuring him to do it. Now, I know this requires taking a deep breath and just waiting and trusting that it's going to be okay. And for me, the way that I know that I'm going to get to my goals is with a couple of things in mind. Number one, that we are not going to cave and do a lot of media. And that's really fundamental in our homeschool. The reason why I feel like I can have this super long tether that my kids can play and wait to do math and wait to really write and even read in some cases is because I know that everything that they're surrounded with and by is really good for them, and it's wholesome, and it's actually academic and educational, even though it's not typically academic and educational. It's really going to fill them in ways that we can't even define and understand, so that when they're ready for that academic work, they're really ready and ripe for it, and they will take it and run with it more than we could have if we had been doing it from the time they were really young. And the only way that you can really do this successfully, in my opinion, in my heart, is that you have trust that your children can achieve that. Now, there are a lot of caveats to this, and as I mentioned, limiting media is huge. The other thing is that in your heart of hearts, if you know that your child has a learning problem or a learning delay, then I encourage you to address that and compensate for it however you feel is necessary within your homeschool or with a medical professional, because you in your heart know the capabilities of your child more than anybody else. So if you feel there is something not quite right, then definitely go with your gut feeling and explore what's going on so that you can provide the best for your child. And once like the environment and the nurturing and the wholesomeness is there, your children can succeed. They will. I don't think they don't want to. I don't think that we are here not to want to succeed. I think we are here to succeed. I think we do want to do well, and I think that when we aren't and when we can't, there's something going on. Maybe an emotional issue, maybe a medical issue, maybe a learning delay, but I think in general, children want to succeed. They want to learn. They want to excel. They are curious. They do love learning, and I think sometimes we end up squashing that in ways that we don't even realize. So, I want to encourage you to take a deep breath and let your kids play, and again, all the wholesome play that I was talking about. And then if you really need to transition them into schoolwork, then try the tips that I suggested, because I feel like you'll get the most out of your child when you can transition them gently into their academic work. If you finally got them to sit with you and you're reading a book, then maybe the next step now is to do an educational game before you finally sit down at the table and do something that's a little bit more boring in the academic sense. I think of worksheets as something boring, so I try to limit them. But there's so many amazing educational games out there that can help you with the basics of education and even more, that I feel like there shouldn't be a dull moment in our education. Now, the only time I think there is a dull moment is when you are practicing a skill that you have learned. And to be honest, this does take up a big portion of our homeschooling. You may learn to add, but then you have to practice adding, and you may learn how to multiply, the concept of it, but then you have to practice it. And I think it's in the practice to become proficient in those skills is where it becomes a little boring and it becomes tedious and it becomes something that we dislike doing. And that's when I encourage the educational games, separate from play, but that's where I encourage the educational games. I think those will come in beautifully to help with those skills. And I have a number of recommendations. I have some videos on them, in fact, and in the description box below, you can find links to the videos that I've already made with those educational games that can really help sharpen those skills that are necessary for the building blocks of your child's education. I'm sure that you guys have tons of suggestions as well. I encourage you to leave them in the comment section below. And if you want to check out some of those videos that I was talking about, you can click right here. And don't forget that if you are worried about the play for your child, just know that he or she will not want to do it eventually. She will grow up and she won't ever want to do the imaginative play that she did when she was little. So do give your child the time to do it now. You'll be ever so thankful later on.